take the cotton out of your ears. You robbed us of generations. The Locke family now among the unfortunate group of families impacted forever by police violence. Others have also joined their fight for police reform. Amir Locke's death has prompted a call to action from local high school students. More than 1,000 students participated in a statewide walkout and march on Tuesday afternoon in Minnesota to protest this latest shooting. Our next guest was leading the charge. Joining me now, one of the co-founders of the advocacy group Minnesota Teen Activists, Jerome Treadwell. Thank you for joining us, Jerome. You've already experienced the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the accountability that was there. I doubt you were expecting to see another victim of police shooting happen so closely in this moment of racial reckoning. So what prompted you to do a walkout?
Yeah, so, this has become a trend in Minnesota, from George Floyd to Philando Castile to recently in 2020 with Daunte Wright. So we led, one of the largest state walkouts in 2020 as well for Daunte Wright to stand in solidarity. So now we're here coming back again for Amir Locke. And what we see here is modern day lynching. It is the social and the political control of Black Americans. This is bleeding into our youth. As early as Emmett Till and as recent as Amir Locke, white men are killing and young Black lives are still dying. So we've said enough is enough. We're no longer going to ask for a seat at the table, but we're flipping over the tables now. So don't be dismayed by this. In the words of Anya Dillard, this is boots and bricks on the ground. So students are not only walking out and marching, but we're meeting with our legislators, both locally and nationally, banning all no-knock warrants and so much more on the systemic change area.
Help our viewers understand what it really means to be a high school student in America today, a Black high school student at that, knowing that you have to experience the threat of gun violence from active shooters. We are in a pandemic, and now you're seeing Jim Crow 2.0.
Yeah, so Jim Crow 2.0 is exactly how I describe it. Breonna Taylor, but in Minnesota, right? The same scenario, very similar to Breonna Taylor. And how are we feeling? How are we connecting with the past and the present? So I submit to you, when was the last time we felt like this? Well, the civil rights era. Today, youth are fighting for policy, from the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the Breonna Taylor law, and now the Amir Locke law. So we've been fighting for policy change for decades upon decades, and oftentimes changes don't come until another murder of a Black man or woman at the hands of police. Furthermore, we don't see policy changes for years and years on to come until many times we're often dead. So what's the tangible solution for youth? We are not only contributing to policy shifts, but as Georgia Fort would say, cultural shifts, mind shifts, heart shifts. That kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier on. Can you train racism, or what's the dynamic and paradigm shift? Well, our submission to you is that we must culturally shift, mind shift, and heart shift. And we do that how? By mobilizing youth all across the nation. But catch this, it's not only Black youth, but it's white, it's Asian, it's Native American, and many ethnic backgrounds to demand our constitutional rights for Black people. We deserve to live, and we certainly have hope in the so protect.
Jerome, want to make sure that we can hear you clearly, particularly when okay, good. I think our audio is back on track. I wanted to ask you before we take our break about what specific thing you're asking for in this moment. Is it a ban to no-knock warrants? What's the ask that you have of leaders?
Yeah, so there's a couple demands we have, right? Real quick. So the first one is a demilitarization of the Minneapolis Police Department. We've seen time and time again where they have failed us, where they're set to protect and serve. We're also asking for the resignation of Police Chief Interim Huffman and Mayor Fry, as well as accountability for the police officer who murdered Amir Locke, and to ban all no-knock warrants. So these are some things that we're really hitting on the head, that we need to protect young Black lives.
Jerome, stay with us because we're going to continue our conversation about the police-involved shooting of Amir Locke's death. We'll be right back with more BNC Live. Welcome back to BNC Live. We're continuing our conversation with Jerome Treadwell. He helped organize the walkout in Minnesota that was in response to the killing of Amir Locke. Thanks for staying with us, Jerome. Wanted to ask you, you've organized a walkout statewide. You have a list of demands and expectations from leaders. So what's next?
So what's next, right? I mentioned earlier that, this is boots and bricks cause real systemic change, in the words of Anya Delar. And what we're focusing now on are mobilizing youth at a national level. So I'm also the youth president for the NAACP, and working with the National Youth and College Division. Our next step is to go to Joe Biden, right? So we're going to take this. There's only 3 states that are banning no-knock warrants, right? So we've seen Tamika Mallory and Until Freedom, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor, and we're taking that model and we're widespreading that. So we're doing social media campaigns. We have connected with our audience. Over 1,000 youth have texted Amir to 33777 to stay connected and find ways to, we're not asking for a seat again. We're flipping over the table and making sure that we're heard and amplifying our voices in those spaces and settings where real tangible change can be made.
Jerome Treadwell will be watching, and thank you for your activism.